Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women in Canadian politics and our active accomplices. But actually, you know what? I'm rethinking that I might have to change up the intro because I feel like actually this podcast might be evolving. But that's a conversation that I need to have in my head and not maybe out loud right now. But my guest today is Andrew Knack, an Edmonton city councillor. You represent Nakota Iska, Ward Nakota Iska. And I reached out because I wanted to chat with you, being from Edmonton and on city council, about the province of Alberta's Bill 20. But before we get started, I just wanted to say hi and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I've enjoyed listening to the show over the years, so it's great to be on the show.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. And as I mentioned before we got started recording, you're the first person I've had on from the city of Edmonton. So, yeah, you know our Edmonton Calgary rivalry. You're wearing a lot of blue today, actually.
Blue's sort of my color, though. That's the thing.
Okay,
Which is interesting, based on a discussion around party politics. But I've just always enjoyed the color blue.
you can enjoy the color blue. No
Ex-
one owns any
exactly.
color, right? Yeah, that's like a whole other thing. We'll get into the partisan politics on municipal on the municipal side. So on Bill 20, for someone who doesn't know what the heck it means or why it's important, what's your explainer of Bill 20?
So the idea behind Bill 20 is it's meant to provide amendments to both the Municipal Government Act as well as the Local Authorities Election Act, which covers a lot of how local elections work, and the Municipal Government Act sort of governs the relationship between the provincial governments and the municipalities. And for the longest time, the rumblings had been that there was going to be one change primarily, which is that the province was looking to introduce political parties across all of Alberta in the local elections. But what has actually come out in Bill 20 is what this is my words, but I think the words of a lot of folks, which is that it's a complete dismantling of sort of how we know local democracy. It's not just introducing political parties into Calgary and Edmonton. It's giving the province the potential ability to remove a councillor for whatever reason they want. It's reintroducing corporate and union donations. It's not increasing transparency. It's getting rid of voting tabulators, which the minister himself in his press conferences talked about. There's no evidence that there's anything wrong with them, but he still wants to do it. So there's a pretty big shift around how local elections will be governed through the changes in Bill 20.
Mm-hmm. But it also would give them the right to repeal and or amend bylaws made by councils by cabinet.
That's right.
So if the provincial governing party, in this case, it's the UCP as the ones bringing in this legislation. For example, there's been a couple of bylaws that have been, well, the example that they were giving was masking, for example, during COVID, but also the bag bylaws that both Edmonton and Calgary have brought in. So different things that maybe aren't anyone else would leave alone, but from an ideological perspective, they have a bone to pick with.
Exactly. And worth noting that in the Edmonton example, the only reason the city of Edmonton had a masking bylaw is because the provincial government under Premier Kenney with Minister McIver in cabinet asked municipalities to make that decision instead of them making the decision. So they essentially turned over the jurisdiction of that decision to municipalities. And so they got a bylaw that they didn't like, and now all of a sudden they wanted to take it back over, which is fine because it's within their jurisdiction. But to use that as a justification for creating new legislation is rather ironic because they're the ones who asked us to do it in the first place. And even the Calgary example, I get that some people don't like that. We have a similar bylaw in the city of Edmonton, but how you manage waste is absolutely municipal jurisdiction. You might not like the decision they have made, but that's not a reason to overturn a bylaw. The only reason you should be looking at overturning bylaws does it go completely against the Municipal Government Act? Is it a clear violation of jurisdiction And they already have tools to do that in a very limited way. So this essentially blows the door wide open, and they could do whatever they want whenever they want.
Yeah. So like there's an arm reaching in and just picking something up. But I mean one of the interesting factors I think in this is that, on the masking issue is that there was a different premier at that time, Jason Kenney. And we have a new premier, Danielle Smith, and they are two different creatures. And so living in Alberta and having lived through and currently still under in COVID, um, the Jason Kenney government wanted municipalities to do their dirty work in terms of like enforcing and creating and putting in place bylaws because they didn't want to, because it was so unpopular with a certain segment of their base. Whereas now Danielle Smith is seemingly on, a warpath to ensure that anything related to COVID fits their ideological stripe more than anything over public safety, in my personal opinion. I won't say that for anyone else. But how do you, like, you and your council colleagues and even the mayor, were you consulted before Bill 20 was announced?
No, and I think that's one of the fundamental challenges here. I mean, the argument being made by the provincial government is they're looking to increase fairness and transparency and accountability, which I think are values all of us share. I don't think you're going to hear a single person say, I don't want local elections to be more fair or transparent and have councillors be more accountable. The question is how are these proposed changes actually accomplishing that? Because I don't even think it's arguably, I think quite clearly the changes that are being made do the exact opposite. And so the lack of engagement from this, right? This has been rumored now for a little over a year. There have been organizations like Alberta Municipalities, which I sit as a board member on, groups like the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, who have been reaching out to the minister, who have been reaching out to the premier saying, hey, we know you're working on some legislation. Can we help work with you on this? Because we want the same things you want. So let's try to co-create that. We've talked about how when you're making changes to how democracy works, you probably should involve the people who are actually voting in elections, because they did do a survey late last year, and the survey results show that almost everything Albertans don't want are now being introduced. So it very much feels like this is the provincial government saying, we have the solution. We know exactly how to do things. We really don't want to talk to anyone else about it, even though there were groups reaching out saying, we're happy to work together with you on this because we want the same things. And that's, I think, what's really challenging. When you look at a lot of municipalities, when we make changes to how local governance and local democracy works, and I'll use an example of in the city of Edmonton, when we update ward boundaries, it's not council that makes that decision. We form an independent citizen commission. They do the research, they do the engagement, they'll make the recommendations. And yes, while technically council approves the recommendation, it's really hard to go against an independent recommendation from a citizen body who has taken the time and effort to research why they're recommending the changes that they're recommending. You should be doing that anytime you're making changes to how elections work, to how democracy works, because we're all biased. As a local elected representative, I'm biased. As a provincial elected representative, they're biased. Let's try to remove that bias as best you can and create better solutions going forward. But this is the complete opposite of that. It harms it in so many different ways.
If anything, I mean, it's leaning into the bias,
Oh, no question.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Right. I think it's, and you saw that through how Minister McIver, and Minister McIver is usually a minister that I
He's
have
known as being pragmatic, right?
and he's known as usually being a straight shooter too.
Mm-hmm.
So it was rather galling to then watch some of the press conference that he had when he first unveiled it to say, oh, we don't have any evidence for this change. We're just doing this. It doesn't matter why. He actually said to one of the questions, I don't care. And, and it just makes you think, okay, so where's the minister that I thought we all knew? Somebody who was, if if their goal is to, essentially try to get their people into municipal government, just say it. I mean, they legally have the right to change the rules to try to help shape municipal councils in their view. So just say it, be upfront and say, that's what we want. We want more conservative city councillors who will be more aligned to the UCP. And that's why we're making these changes. I'd at least have, I'd still hate it, but I at least respect that they were telling the truth and saying this
Yeah.
is what we're hoping to accomplish. But they tried to pretend that they're making it more transparent. Well, you don't make it more transparent by bringing back corporate and union donations. How does that increase transparency?
Well, I think it's really interesting. And I think we're actually going to start to see more of this. I mean, it's a brilliant spin in some ways, right? Being like, yeah, this is more transparent. And then someone would, hear them say that and then think it to be true, right? When it's actually the opposite, which I find to be problematic. But on the other side, it's genius.
It's that thing of if you repeat a lie enough, do you convince people that it's true? And that's very much what it seems like right now. They're going out of their way to say, oh yeah, this makes it more fair. Oh yes, this makes it more transparent. When I think, and that's why you've seen when Albertans have been asked this question, they haven't wanted the things that have been suggested because it doesn't actually do this. So, and it's part of why I think that there hasn't been a lot of talk about those surveys that the province did, because this clearly
It
goes
doesn't
against.
work with the agenda that they have. Well, and
No.
it's interesting because there's a clip, you can find it on the internet, of Danielle Smith prior to becoming premier being asked, what do you think is the best form of government? And she was like, well, gee, I think actually Nunavut. And, I really think that the way that, the non-party structure and everyone's an individual, and I'm, obviously loose, very like, I'm not directly quoting her, but anyone can go and look it up and hear what she had to say. How times have changed
Yeah, and
when
that was
you
only
are now in
two.
the seat of power and you're doing exactly what you said you didn't want to do, which is actually different because she is usually a straight shooter as well. And what she says, she does, but not in this case.
Yeah, and again, people are allowed to change their minds. That
Yeah.
was her
Yes.
opinion 2 years
Yes.
ago, and I don't want to discourage people from changing their minds. But again, if you're going to change your mind on something as
Just say
fundamental as,
it.
yeah, say it. Hey, you know what? I changed my mind. Here's why I changed my mind, and I
Yeah.
think this is a better solution. But that's not happening. And again, that sort of feeds into this clear indication that this is not about transparency, because if it was, you should at least be transparent about why you're doing it.
Right. Well, and on the transparency on something else that had been the most publicly part that was teased about this legislation was that it would bring in political parties at the municipal level. So, Andrew, are you prepared to run in a party structure on a slate of candidates?
No, and I hate the idea of it, and I think it's because, like a lot of people, growing up, I was really conservative growing up. I've talked about that a little bit over the years of how, very socially and fiscally, I would consider myself very hard right. And as the years went on, my values have shifted and changed, and I've learned new things. And particularly on the social side, I would consider myself much more left than I was. But I still understand that perspective as somebody that grew up really conservative. And I don't fault people for sitting in that. I might be center left now. I don't know where I sit on the spectrum because
It's
municipal
hard. It's
politics is
Alberta. It's very
a little bit of a
confusing.
mess.
Yeah.
But the idea that you sort of have to force yourself into a political party, especially municipally, is I think counterintuitive to how we do our work. What's the right wing way of clearing snow? What's the left wing way of clearing snow? I don't know. So why are we trying to go down a path where folks are going to be beholden to the party that they're looking to run with versus the
Mm-hmm.
people we are elected to serve? And so I hate the idea of it. But the problem is, and I think this goes to the notion of fairness, is that under the current rules, a party could run. There's nothing stopping a party before Bill 20 from running. The issue is that right now, if you run as a political party, you're not allowed to share voter lists. You're not allowed to share fundraising dollars. You have to still operate as a bit of an individual, but you are maybe aligned with your values. So if the rules change, and they're clearly going to change, what does that mean for somebody that wants to run as an independent? Will they be at a democratic disadvantage because now the parties can share volunteer lists, now they can share fundraising dollars, and if they allow that, just like you see provincially and federally, how many people run as an independent and actually get elected? Almost no one, because the way the system is designed is that if you run as an independent, you're actually at a disadvantage. It is
Disadvantage.
less fair than right now. Right now, it is equal. Everyone is on the same footing, even those that want to run as a party.
Mm-hmm.
That's about to change. So it's going to make it hard for somebody that wants to be independent to try to stay independent because it might be harder to actually get elected in the first place.
Have you thought about what you're going to do?
Yeah, a million times, and I feel like it has to change every day.
I'm
Uh,
sure.
but I think what I've seen in the results over the years that the province has asked this question, and even very recently now that these changes have been announced, is that I'm still hearing from far more people than not who say, I don't want to see these changes. We don't want to see that notion of that partisan system seep into the city halls, because if you look at what happens in the legislature, if you look at what happens in parliament, it's not always the most constructive situation to get good governance. And so I think there's still going to be a pretty strong appetite for independent representation.
Hmm.
And so I hope that means that folks can do that, even if they're at a bit of a disadvantage from a financing standpoint, from a volunteer standpoint, that Edmontonians and Calgarians, because now it's only being piloted, and I purposely use air quotes when I say that, in the two biggest cities. I think there will still be a desire to elect people that they know will answer to the individual versus the party that they're elected under.
But even with, assuming some like independents still get elected, the province through Bill 20 will have the ability to remove councillors. They will have the ability to overrule policies brought in by council. So they're putting in place backup mechanisms. Right? If people may manage to navigate the system outside of a political party structure, they're still and they're first and it happened they happened to be in a majority position. The province could still change things if they weren't on side with what a majority of council brought forward.
Which is one of the most troubling aspects of this. And even though Minister McIver very recent yesterday essentially has said, well, they're going to make some changes to the ability to remove a councillor, the ability to overturn a bylaw. I can understand why many people, including myself, are very skeptical, because again, today they have the legal authority to remove a councillor. It's been used, once in Chestermere last year. I think the last time before that was in 2016 under under the NDP government. So it's used very, very sparingly. Similarly, the idea of being able to overturn a bylaw. So they have that authority in most cases. So why do you need to add more legislation if you're not looking to make it easier to do so? That's the problem right now that we're facing. So even with proposed amendments, I think what you're seeing is a desire to centralize decision-making authority within the provincial government to try to make sure that anyone who's elected in any municipality across this province is not just thinking about the people they're supposed to be serving, but now they want them thinking about, what's the province want me to do, in the back of their mind,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
that's why we're seeing people from across the province, municipal leaders from across the province, ones who clearly, come from areas that voted overwhelmingly UCP, are speaking up too, because I think most people realize that this is absolutely an overreach. And I found it really rich that Premier Smith was essentially asked the same question of saying, well, listen, you're fighting back against Ottawa for all of these things. You're essentially trying to do the same thing municipally. And her answer was, yeah, but we're legally allowed to. That's a bit of a paraphrase, but it's so blatant that they actually don't respect local elected representation. They don't respect the local voters, because if they did, they would allow them to continue to vote for who they want so that they can continue to make decisions. And that will sometimes be at odds with what the current provincial government wants. But guess what? Democracy is messy. And there will be times that you don't get what you want, and your
That's
reaction
just the way
should
the
be
cookie crumbles, isn't it?
exactly.
Like
Yes,
sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes you don't like something, but you get the chance, however often an election happens, where you get to use your vote to decide whether you're going to agree or disagree, send the person back, or, kick them out of their job.
that's how it's meant to
Right?
work.
That's
Yeah.
how it's meant to work. And it really kind of grates me um that this is being done in the name of conservatism, because I actually don't think there's anything conservative about this.
No,
Right? Because conservatism to me means smaller and less government. This is more government. This is more extension. This is more everything that I think that truly, like, the bare bones basics of conservatism is this isn't anything like that. The direction that the UCP is taking us in, as a province, is very different.
absolutely. And yeah, it's as someone that grew up really conservative and voted conservative a lot of his life. I very much feel like there has been a complete shift, and even in the last, from this version of the UCP to the last version under Premier Kenny. Premier Kenny wasn't the biggest fan of municipalities, and I think we saw that in a lot of decisions. But there was at least still some semblance of respect. And
Yes.
I know that Mayor, in Edmonton, Mayor Sohi was able to work with Premier Kenny. And one of the last things he did before the he got kicked out essentially was they brought forward a great new package around how to address housing and homelessness in the city of Edmonton. And I did not think that was going to be possible, and yet Mayor Sohi and Premier Kenny, who sat on the opposite ends of the federal system too, when they were both
Hmm.
in federal government, still managed to find some commonalities, some respect towards one another to make decisions. We've seen a complete lack of respect from this premier, and I've never seen it in any of the other governments I've worked with. I've been doing this now 10 years, so I've worked with the PCs, the NDPs, the premier, the UCP under Kenny, and now the UCP under Smith. And it's only in the last year that we've seen a dramatic shift in how municipalities are being treated. They are actively working to undermine local representation, not just in Calgary and Edmonton. And I mean, you would think it would just be Calgary and Edmonton, but you see it province-wide now in what they're doing. And it's why I think municipalities across this province are speaking up more and more, because it's such a different world, and one that I never thought I'd have to be a part of, because
Hmm.
it's just really frustrating to see. And most importantly, the people who get punished are the people we're all trying to serve, because we're too busy having to sort of fight against some really important legislation when we could be focusing on making differences for the things we need to address locally.
Well, I mean, the province is really concerned with jurisdiction, right? And this is a municipal area, and this is a provincial area. Like, has Edmonton City Council had any conversations, saying, okay, you know what, we're gonna take do kind of a core review and say these things are 100% within our jurisdiction, and these, we've been stepping up to the plate and doing things that are actually within the jurisdiction of the province, because we haven't seen them, stepping up to do that work. And because we've had the best interests of our residents in mind, we've been filling this gap. We're going to say no more. We're going to go back. We're going to tell the province, you're right. We're only going to do with what 100% of what's in our jurisdiction. And here you go. What's your plan?
Yeah, and this is that hard conversation, because we're about to have it in June. And it's really tough, because the biggest area that Edmonton City Council has taken a lead on, and this has again been province-wide, you've seen it in many municipalities, is most municipalities have been leaning more into housing and social services, which are clearly the jurisdiction of the provincial government. Municipalities have always played a very small role, often providing land, but never this active,
Building.
right? Exactly. But the question we come up against, and the real tension in this, is that if you make that decision to say we're out, we're not putting in Emmons case, we're putting in 183 million into housing. If we say, you know what, it's coming back down to zero,
Mm-hmm.
who
Yeah,
gets
people
hurt
will get
because of
hurt.
that decision? And
Yeah.
because we know that they aren't going to make that up anytime soon. At the same time, if you don't finally put that line in the sand, essentially, do you give them a free pass
Yeah.
forever? Because
Right.
it's never going to change. And so there's going to be a really tense conversation. Because on one hand, I worry that if we say no, people are literally going, have the potential to die. But if you keep saying yes, right now the status quo is not getting us where we need to and getting people the help they need. So if you want to get to the right end result, do you have to be willing to make a major shift?
Yeah.
And that's what's really hard.
It's,
Local
yeah.
leaders don't want to have to let people down in the short term while we await a proper resolution for long-term solutions.
Well, and I think a big thorn in all of this, a thorn in the side of the provincial government is that the federal government under Justin Trudeau and the federal Liberals have said, okay, if the provinces, if you're not willing to play ball on, housing and signing deals with us, we'll just go around you and we'll work directly with the municipalities. And Danielle Smith and the UCP hate this. They hate it. But I mean, that would be one way to force the UCP's hand, is saying, you're okay, sure.
It is, but the other thing you come back to is that the people that we serve often tell us, I don't care whose
Yeah.
jurisdiction it is, the problem needs to be fixed. We have a massive issue, and again, province-wide, we're hearing it more and more about people experiencing homelessness who are living in encampments because they don't have shelters, they don't have housing, and I could just say to anyone who calls me, oh yeah, go talk to the province. But when we say that, people say, well, you're just pointing fingers. Can't you just fix it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the tension we run into, is that the people that we serve don't care whose jurisdiction, they just want to see resolution. But at the same time, maybe it's the right way to finally provoke some change in a more substantial way going forward.
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, I think if I was, I'm going to play hypothetical, if I was on council, I would definitely be having that conversation around, what's the, is, uh, yeah, that would be really tricky. That would be really tricky. But you're right. People don't understand what is a municipal responsibility or what is a provincial responsibility or even what's a federal responsibility, because they just expect that things get done.
Mhm.
And they have a right to expect that. But whose bucket of money that thing comes out of is pretty complicated.
That's right. And that's part of why we have to have this conversation when you're running a $2 billion or $5 billion surplus provincially and people don't have enough housing. You sort of ask yourself, well, are we really running a surplus, or are we just choosing to ignore things that are actually supposed to be dealt with for the sake of pretending to have a good balance sheet? And now municipalities are charging increased property taxes to help offset those items, and so we're taking up the flag for a lot of these things. And
Mm-hmm.
it's no shock that municipalities across the province have seen pretty large tax increases over the last year, 2 years now, because we've seen steady reductions in a number of areas.
I mean, Edmonton and Calgary are different in that Calgary is known to be more conservative than Edmonton. And so, what I'm seeing in Calgary, or what I can anticipate possibly, is that going into municipal elections next year, is that there actually could very well be a large appetite from residents who are like, yeah, I don't want my money, I don't want to see more increases in my taxes to pay for things for housing because, yeah, I just don't want to see my money going there. Or so I think there will be a shift from maybe moderate, more independent minded councillors to um, um, likely, I think in Calgary at least, maybe a more conservative looking city council. Can you see shifts or those headwinds in Edmonton as well? It is a different city and you have a different voter base.
It is, but I think you are seeing that sort of financial fatigue, on that cumulative basis. And so when your municipality, including in Edmonton, raises taxes almost 9% in 2024, it doesn't matter that the previous 4-year budget, we had the lowest property taxes over in 25 years over each of that 4-year period. Because right now, people are seeing it in their grocery bills, in their insurance, in their utilities, and now property taxes. And of course, property taxes is the one you sort of feel the most because it comes out after your paycheck has been deposited. We're pulling that money out of your account afterwards, not taking it out before it sort of goes in. And so I expect we'll even see a shift like that in Edmonton. Whether it would be a majority of a party, I don't think so. But I think there's absolutely that desire to see some greater focus. But then it comes up against, it's easy for somebody to campaign on that. And we had a party that just started up essentially the day after the announcement that said, oh, we're going to cut $400 million out of the budget. And it's like, I sort of hear that and they're like, yeah, okay, but you're not going to touch policing because they talked about safety, which is our number one operating budget item. You're not going to touch transit, which is our second biggest budget item. So how do you pull out so much of the budget without being willing to have not, I mean, you could stop doing all the provincial things tomorrow in Calgary and Edmonton, and you're still not going to see a massive shift in part because of how quick our populations are growing.
Well, can I take a quick guess at what maybe that they might be wanting to go after?
Yeah.
Is it administration?
Yeah, and I mean that's the easy punching bag, right? It's easy to pick on middle management. And Edmonton, we did a big reduction in middle management, but it's still always the one that people can come back to. Oh, staffing.
Yeah.
But even that, it doesn't recognize the reality that we're seeing across this province, that our population is growing faster than we've seen in the last 40 or 50 years. And so when your city is getting larger, you naturally, like, you're going to have to reach a point where you fund that appropriately. If your household suddenly had double the amount of people living in your household, whether that goes from 1 to 2 or 4 to 8, you know that your budget's going to change because there are more people living in that space. And unlike provincially and federally, where income taxes generally can keep up with that growth, property taxes don't really make up the cost of somebody moving into a city.
Well, and you have a map behind you, actually. And so from I can see like the northernmost point to the southernmost point, those points and the extremities require the same services that those in the middle do, but the cost of getting them there.
And it's funny, this map is a 2007 map.
Oh.
So outside the Anthony Henday, there's almost nothing here, which was essentially 17 years ago. Now we're pretty much right up against the airport in Edmonton. And so when you're adding all of that new residential development with new people, and you need to build fire halls and police stations and rec centers and
water lines, sewer.
Unfortunately, the cost, the amount you bring in property taxes never covers the cost of that outward growth. And so that's the other pressure that folks are going to face. But again, that's not something the average person is following on an everyday basis. They just say, hey, you got more people, don't you have more money? And so it makes it easy for something like Bill 20 to be talked about and saying, oh, I'm angry because my taxes went up quite a bit. Maybe I do want to have a change, and this might be the right thing because I'm not happy right now at this moment. So I'm a little more accepting of it.
So how are you figuring this into if you are going to run again, how are you going to figure this into your messaging?
I think there's a few things to talk about. I think the first is, again, one of the biggest questions that was asked. The Group Alberta Municipalities did a survey in the fall, and they asked people whether they like the idea of political parties or not. And even though about 70% said no, they didn't, the question that I don't think a lot of people grabbed onto, which I found was the most fascinating, is a question was asked of both groups, those in favor and those opposed to it. And they said, do you believe, what percentage do you agree that the person who gets elected under a political party will be more loyal to the party than the people that they serve? And obviously those who oppose political parties were overwhelmingly saying, no, of course that's going to be the case. But what was fascinating is even for that 30% of Albertans that were surveyed that said, yes, we want political parties, a majority of that 30% also said that the person that's going to be elected is going to be more loyal to the party than they are the people that they serve. So everyone actually recognizes that. And I think that's the part that really needs to be singled out in this conversation, because our job, my job as a councillor in Edmonton is I'm not just elected to serve the residents of the ward that I represent. I'm actually, my oath is to all Edmontonians. I must try to make decisions that help benefit all Edmontonians. And if you now also have a political party in the background, you're going to hear that party structure, that party team, um, also sitting in the back of your head talking about, well, what's best for the party right now? Because what if a party in Edmonton, what if 7 people get elected? So they get a majority of just 1 seat. And then there's an issue that comes up that's local that might be a decision that could actually hurt a particular part of the city. What
Mm-hmm.
do you do as the local councillor if you're in that party? Because my guess is most parties aren't going to say, oh, yes, we'll encourage free votes. No, no, that doesn't happen in any political party. So I think that's the message that you keep coming back to, which is that do you want people to actually try to hear all of the voices that already exist and that diversity of perspective and try to make the best decision for everyone in that group? Or do you want to add one more group to that, which is political parties, which are not accountable to the average voter? Because think about the debate you're having in Calgary right now on the zoning bylaw. We're at what, day 10 of the public hearing at the time we're having this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a great diversity of views. I've listened into some of it. It's very similar to the debate we went through last October. And there is a bit of a generational divide in this compared to most issues. And it's a tough decision for those counselors because you know that no matter what decision you make, you're going to make some people upset about a
Yes.
really important topic. But now, do you also want to have that notion of a political party sitting behind that, helping to try to inform which group you end up supporting? That's the messy part of this, is that you're now introducing something that nobody's asked for that will now be there also influencing the decision instead of just taking into account the people that are actually going to be impacted by the decision that you make.
Well, I think there's a great opportunity for anyone running next year for in Calgary or Edmonton, when it comes to community debates to challenge if you happen to still run as an independent, to challenge someone who's running as part of a new political party, to say, like, to use an example like this and to really challenge them and say, who are you going to are you going to just vote toe the party line? Are you going to vote for party over constituents? Because that could be a deciding factor in how someone votes.
Yeah, and we know the answer to that question, and we won't have to look any further than when Bill 20 finally comes forward, because I don't think they're going to make much in terms of significant changes. So when that
Yeah.
comes forward onto the floor of the legislature, every single member of the UCP, even the ones who don't want it, and I know there's ones who don't want it, are going to be stuck to go into the legislature and vote yes. Why? Because
Mm-hmm.
the party told them to go vote yes. Doesn't matter that their local residents don't want it. Doesn't matter that the local uh, perspective, actually, the province-wide perspective is that folks don't want it, but the party has said it, so therefore it shall be.
Mm-hmm.
So what makes us think that that's going to be any different locally? It's not.
Yeah, no, it won't be. It'll be the same. So we'll have to see. It's going to be really interesting. I wish Alberta politics was more boring.
Yes, it would be
It seems
wonderful.
it's just a lot right now.
It has been, I think people still need to remember that, and it's hard because it's so exhausting. After 10 years of doing this, I thought I would be, sort of in a rhythm, but it's actually been really hard this last, year and a half, and because it can get so exhausting, you almost feel like, I don't want to be part of this right now.
Yeah.
And when every person who's like, I don't want to be part of it, sort of disconnects, then what happens is it makes it that much easier to bring through these things. Thank goodness people spoke up about a low-income transit pass being cut by the provincial government. But if people were too exhausted to speak up about that, that just would have happened. And
Yeah.
so it's a reminder that we still do have the ability to affect change. We still have the ability to affect change outside of an election period. We still need to speak up. You might not get everything you want, but note that your voice can still
Mm-hmm.
make a difference. Even in this changing world, I think it'll have less of an impact once Bill 20 gets approved. But it's important that until that change happens, people keep working, and even after that change happens.
Yeah, it is. The fatigue is real. And people checking out is, because it's not just things that are happening provincially, but, nationally, globally, it's a lot. And, the seemingly rapid introduction. Well, I mean, what seemingly, but a lot of bills are being introduced that have a lot of really big consequences. And it's easy for people to be like, you know what, I just don't have the capacity to take this on, or to understand it, or, I'm already protesting this. How can I take on something else?
And I would add, I think the other piece is that, it's exhausting for me as a now 40-year-old middle-aged white guy.
Don't say
Um,
middle age, because I just turned 41 and
Very
I'm
good. Well, okay, I won't
grappling
say
with
middle
that.
age, 40-year-old.
We're still young, aren't we?
Exactly. I think so.
Yeah.
But I mean, I now work with 8 women on city council. And when we had our election in 2021, it was the first time that many women were elected. The amount of abuse and toxicity they get
Mm-hmm.
compared to me, I can't even begin to imagine how exhausting that is for women of color in a world now. Like I'm trying, I feel exhausted, and yet I know I get maybe 1% of what others are getting. And I see the toll it takes on other folks and how that's even causing them to think, do I want to run, whether run for reelection or to other people? There's at least one person I talked with since these changes who was originally thinking of running, and she talked to me and said, gosh, I really don't know if I want to do this now. And it's because it's just been a constant attack, and it's making it harder and harder on people who don't look like me to try to be involved in this process. And so I
Yeah.
think we can't ignore that reality in all of this, in how Bill 20 impacts that aspect of it as well. The fundraising rules that are going to change, which I know are boring to a lot of people, actually, again, disproportionately impact new folks who want to try to enter the system because it
Mm-hmm.
makes it that much harder for them to be a part of it. So that's a dynamic in this exhaustion that's being faced by many folks.
Yeah, it is a lot. And yeah, there will be real repercussions to Bill 20, um, Bill 18, Bill, right? There are very much real world consequences to
Bill.
these things. And yeah, people still need to find the time to care, even when it's
Mhm.
hard and feels like it's too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you for chatting with me today. And yeah, I'm excited to see how what your journey is like navigating this legislation, and what it looks like going into municipal elections in Alberta next year for everyone. And we'll have to see what happens. Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of change, but and remember that at the time we're talking about this, people can still speak up, especially if you've got a
Hmm.
Calgary audience, which I know you do, to reaching out to the UCP MLAs in Calgary, because if you speak up on this and they hear it enough, maybe just like the low income transit pass, they'll make a different decision.
Yeah, that is definitely, people, I think, don't understand the power that they have to contact their local elected officials, municipal, provincial, or even federal, and to say, I'd like to meet with you, or I'm going to send you an email, or can I set up a phone call with you? And oh, you're not available? Then who can I talk to on your staff? Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you just have to be a little, you do have to be relentless.
You do, but it
Yeah,
works. It makes a difference. And
it
I love
does.
hearing from people. I'd much rather hear from people, including the angry ones, than not hear from people at all, because it gives me a chance to better understand what everyone's thinking.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. I completely agree. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. And I don't know, maybe I should ask, are the Oilers still in the playoffs?
They are. They just advanced to the second round. We're waiting to see
Oh,
who will play at the time of this recording. But yes,
congratulations.
thank you. Everyone needs to watch the Oilers because that's
Well, I mean, okay,
at least
sure.
in Edmonton. Don't say you don't watch hockey. I don't watch a lot
I
of hockey.
don't actually,
I
and my
don't
husband's
either,
not
and
a
I feel
hockey
so bad.
person. I will say that I have two sons, and one of them, we were talking last week, and he said, I was like, like, "Well, do you like hockey?" And one of them actually said that he likes the Oilers, but he said he's torn between the Jets because he likes that they have an actual jet in their logo. Um, but
Well, they're out of the playoffs now, so only one choice left.
well, for a Canadian team,
Well, I mean, you got Toronto and Vancouver, but I mean, if
Yeah.
you're someone choosing
Hi.
between Winnipeg and Edmonton, now Winnipeg's out. Let's go with Edmonton.
That is such an Edmonton thing. Like, it's just that's so funny. Yeah. Okay, well, good luck. Keep I hope you do really well. And it would be great if you would win for as an Alberta team, but and maybe that can take the edge off some nights of thinking about Bill 20.
Absolutely. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me.
Thanks, Andrew.